If you're hearing this, then I'm already gone. Or at least, what was me. Long pause. My name is Wyatt Hale, United States Department of the Interior, Fire Management Specialist, assigned out of Shiprock, New Mexico. Border region. Chusca Mountains to the east, Deneta Land to the south. Used to be Bureau of Land Management, now just a hollow badge and a bigger patrol route. I've been working federal assignments for over 12 years. Forest fire prevention, trail enforcement, terrain logging, backcountry response. I've seen droughts carve out valleys, watched smoke eat the sun for a week straight. I've found hikers, some living, some not, deep in areas where no trail should have led. But none of that prepared me for what I found while compiling these files. I thought this was going to be another log entry, another night spent in a tower somewhere, a coyote howl, maybe a trespassing warning. I didn't think I'd be the one broadcasting a final warning, uploading a story, knowing I may never see the signal leave this station. I didn't used to believe the stories, the old ones, the kind the tribal elders whisper over unlit fires where words are carefully chosen or not spoken at all. Because even naming some things is enough to bring them closer. At first, I thought this was about skinwalkers. The files I found were labeled with cautionary tags, marked with broken code, corrupted dates. But I've heard skinwalker stories before. We've all heard them. The transformation, the mimicry, the way they test the edge of your hearing at night. They've been told and retold, usually by people who want to be scared. But what I found, it wasn't about fear. It was about observation, study, replication. These things, whatever they are, they're not hunting us, they're learning. They're testing limits, boundaries. Not just physical ones, but cultural, psychological. They've seen the masks we wear, the fears we bury. They're not haunting anyone. They're documenting us. I don't think they were ever meant to be known, because even the tribes with centuries of stories and creatures and gods, won't name what lives in these files. They treat it differently, like something ancient that wasn't supposed to survive, something older than the land itself. There's a phrase I found in one of the redacted ranger logs, buried in an off-grid journal from 1971. These aren't spirits, they're survivors of something worse. And that stuck with me, because that implies something even more terrifying. That whatever created these things didn't make it, and they did. The deeper I went, the more the files started, as if something was trying to test how far it could go before I noticed. I kept telling myself it was just stress, sleep deprivation. The landscape out there plays tricks on your senses. It always has. But then the voice recording started. Not ones I made. On my backup drive, buried in a folder I never created, were files marked with my name, my voice, but I never spoke those words. Some were garbled. Others were complete narrations, entire monologues recorded in what sounded like my cadence, but just off enough to make my skin crawl. I would say something out loud, then find a file where that same phrase had been spoken 3 days before. They were ahead of me, like they'd already run this test, and were waiting to see if I noticed I was part of it. So I gathered what I could, stitched together the logs, the footage, the call reports, even the suppressed interviews from field agents who quit without explanation. Each one built on the last. Some were missing pieces, others contradicted each other, but the pattern, it's there. There are 6 core incidents I found, each more isolated than the last, but they all speak to the same intelligence, the same presence, Something that doesn't want to be seen, because it already knows we're watching the wrong things. This isn't Volume 5. Not my Volume 5. It's something else. Using me to tell a story that's already been written, like I'm reading the script it once heard. I'm going to narrate these cases anyway, because maybe the act of telling them is what it's waiting for. Maybe that's part of the test. But I need you to understand something. If my voice changes, if my tone shifts, if the patterns in my words stop sounding like me, I just hope it forgets me before I forget myself. This is MindFuel, and what you're about to hear isn't folklore. It's evidence, raw, unprocessed, uncomfortably real. And if these uploads ever stop, just know, it wasn't because I quit. I want you to subscribe, not for me, for the people who never got to tell their side, for the ones who vanished long before any of this could be recorded, for the ones who left messages in the dirt, hoping someone like you would find them. Each chapter you hear pulls back a layer no one's supposed to see. And if you've ever wondered what might be watching us from the edges of understanding, stay, because you haven't heard the worst of it. Not yet. The sky burial that failed. Northern Plains, Lakota Territory. Midway between what is now central South Dakota and the edge of Standing Rock. A plateau of wind-scoured stone that locals just call the Rafter Bones. I got the file through an older connection, retired federal liaison, Lakota descent. He said it wasn't something they wrote down, wasn't part of official record, and it wasn't exactly a legend either. He said, this one didn't pass on, it passed through. Brief wind howl, tape shuffle. Sky burials are sacred. They're not meant to be disturbed. They were never supposed to be cataloged. The practice, centuries old, meant raising the deceased up into the open air onto a wooden platform among the trees or atop a high structure. Not just for the spirits to find their way, but to return the body to the elements, back to the wind, the sun, the creatures that walk and fly. But in this case, the wind never took him. His name was Red Elk, elder, tribal historian, well respected. Died in his sleep in late autumn, 1963. No illness, no foul play. Just laid down one night and didn't wake up. The community built the platform according to custom, not just tradition, but reverence. They left him there, high above the ground, so the sky could take what it needed. But it didn't. Week 1. Nothing touched the body. No birds, no insects, no scent of rot. He just lay there, untouched, unclaimed. By week 3, something strange was noticed. Subtle at first. One of the elders said his left arm looked shifted, as if it had been moved across his chest, like someone had tried to fold him differently. But there were no signs of disturbance. No tracks in the soft dirt below. No broken limbs on the tree that held the platform. And no one had gone near it since the day of the ceremony. They checked again 4 days later. Now his legs were crossed, his head tilted to the side. Mouth slightly open, like he was trying to speak. They didn't talk about it outside the council, didn't write it down. They thought maybe it was the wind, maybe birds they didn't see. But then one of the boys, Daniel, age 10, was found sleepwalking, out past the boundary stones. When they stopped him, he said, "He keeps asking what my name is. I don't want to tell him." They thought it was just a dream. Children hear things. They mirror adult fear. But the next morning, Red Elk was sitting upright. No blood, no trauma, just posed. There was a split boulder there, jagged from a long-ago lightning strike. They used to leave small offerings in the cracks. That day, one of them dropped his tobacco pouch into the crevice, bent down to retrieve it, and screamed. Not because of bones or blood, but because he saw a face, perfectly etched, like erosion had been reversed. The contours were exact. Even the cheek scar Red Elk had carried from a bear attack in 1924. The stone had his face, mouth closed, eyes wide, but not screaming, just watching. The council sealed the area, closed off access to the rafter grounds for a generation. They said it was for protection, from storms, from erosion. But that wasn't it. They feared whatever had claimed Red Elk wasn't finished. Pause. A breath. And here's where things shift, because this wasn't an isolated event. A few months ago, 2024, a hiker sent in trail cam footage from a route north of the same region. Footage they didn't notice until reviewing it weeks later. One of the clips, captured between 2:16 and 2:18 a.m., showed a figure standing completely still on a distant ridge. Too far for detail, until lightning struck, just for a second, and the stone behind the figure reflected light, like a polished face, etched in granite, wide-eyed, unblinking, identical to the carving from 1963, identical to Red Elk, but now taller. Pause. The footage cut out right after. No audio, no timestamp glitch. Just stopped. We reached out to the hiker. They never responded. When their emergency contact was called, they said the hiker had been missing for 2 weeks. Their last message sent was a photo of the boulder, but it was smooth. No face, just ancient, featureless stone. Long silence. Elders say that some people don't pass on. They pass through, into the land, into the air, sometimes into the things we think can't hold memory. Some say Red Elk never died, that he simply moved out of the human form and into something older. He didn't rot because he wasn't meant to leave us. Not yet. Maybe the stone remembered his name. Maybe the sky did too. Pause. Then narrator whispers quietly. Or maybe he was the first one they tried to copy. Narrator, firmer tone, pulling the viewer back into the docu-horror frame. I didn't believe the story at first, until I started comparing regional stone erosion files, satellite models from the 60s through now, and found 3 identical outcroppings, each with a different face, each near a site where sky burials used to be performed. The clay that remembers faces. Zuni territory, western New Mexico. Ancestral grounds. Dry mesas where silence clings to the cliffs like dust. And everything older than memory stays buried, until it decides otherwise. The site isn't marked on any tourist map. The name isn't spoken outside the pueblo. What the archaeologists call ZP6 is just a vague grid in the academic records, but those who live nearby know exactly where it is. They say the earth there isn't dead. It listens. And if you press your hands into the clay long enough, it will press back. In 2021, a young pottery apprentice, Jonas Tochi, was accepted into an intertribal arts preservation program. He was Zuni on his mother's side, Hopi on his father's. 22 years old, careful hands, quiet demeanor. He worked under a master ceramicist in the hills north of Black Rock, shaping bowls and effigies the traditional way. No spinning wheels, no molds, just the coil and scrape method, passed down for generations. Jonas had a gift. He could feel the difference between clays just by handling them. Where others saw dust and water, he saw memory. And maybe that's why it found him first. The first incident was written off as a mistake. He'd left a set of drying bowls under a canvas overnight. 7 of them, freshly shaped, smooth as bone. But the next morning one had changed. Not cracked, not slumped. It had a face. Pressed gently from the inside. Not sculpted. There were no tool marks, just the vague impression of something human. Eyes closed, mouth open. No hair, no name. His mentor assumed Jonas had tried something experimental. Jonas denied it. Said he'd never touch that bowl again after setting it down. They laughed it off, set it aside as a curiosity. Sometimes clay shifts. Sometimes it settles strangely, especially when you're working near the old soil pits. But it happened again and again, over 3 consecutive nights. Each time, a new bowl. Each time, a new face, more defined, more alive. The 4th one was unmistakable. It looked like his neighbor, an elderly woman who brought food to the kiln shed during long firings. Her drooping left eye, her deeply lined cheeks, perfectly formed, as if the clay had memorized her in silence. By the 5th day, Jonas stopped sleeping. He set up a small motion-activated camera inside the work tent, something to either confirm his own fears or disprove them. The camera recorded from dusk to dawn, almost nothing at first. Hours of stillness, wind shifting the tarp. But at 3:11 a.m. something moved, not outside the bowl, inside it.
But part of him already knew this wasn't meant to be shared. Because the bowls weren't reacting to touch. They were reacting to attention. Each time he looked longer, the next bowl's face became more detailed, more specific. One morning, after another sleepless night, he walked into the tent and found 7 bowls lined up in perfect symmetry. He hadn't arranged them. He never left more than 2 to dry at once. Now there were 7, and all had faces. Some he recognized, others he didn't. One looked like his great-grandfather who passed before Jonas was born. One looked like his mentor. One looked like himself, except the mouth was sewn shut. That afternoon, Jonas asked for leave, said he needed to go home for a few days. No one argued. He seemed exhausted, frayed. He left behind his tools, his journal, even his clothes. The next morning, the kiln tech came in early to prep a new batch, found the tent empty, except for Jonas's shirt, and a fresh bowl, still damp. It didn't have a face, not exactly. It had no face, just smooth surface, like it had been wiped clean. The tech didn't understand what he was looking at, until he got a call 2 hours later. Jonas had been found in the hills outside the ancestral dig site, sitting beneath a stone ledge, hands folded, eyes open, alive, breathing, but his face was gone. No damage, no blood, just smooth flesh where his features had been. No nose, no eyes, no mouth. Doctors said it was a neurological event, a rare disorder. They wrote words like conversion disorder and psychogenic blindness, but no scan explained why his bone structure had changed, why his skull had reformed without signs of trauma, why he didn't panic, why he never spoke again. He just sat there, listening, like something else was listening through him. Weeks later, one of the old women from the pueblo went to the site, not to speak, but to bury something, a piece of broken clay, with a face etched faintly on the underside. She didn't explain, just said, "He looked too long," and the clay remembered. I filed this story under artifact anomalies.
but it belongs in a different category: transference. This wasn't a possession, this was replacement. Something is using ancient mediums, stone, ash, clay, to copy us, to preserve us in forms we never agreed to, like a record being kept by something that doesn't understand what death is supposed to mean. And if memory can live in the soil, what else might wake inside it? I'll upload the next story when I can. But I'm starting to notice something in my own logs, voicemails I don't remember leaving, drafts I didn't write. Last night, my reflection smiled before I did. The story that breathed. Northern Minnesota, Ojibwe territory. A small, lakeside reserve nestled in the trees, where the pines hum even when the wind is still. Where old myths aren't told to entertain, they're told to warn. This one came to me through a box of reel-to-reel tapes, unmarked, no return address. Just a note, handwritten in red pencil. Don't listen more than once. I didn't know what it meant, not until I heard the voice, not until the story started changing, while it was being told. The recordings belong to Elder Miskwa, one of the oldest oral historians on the reserve. He'd preserved nearly 200 traditional tales across decades, all spoken, never written, because he believed words aren't just sounds, they're agreements, and some agreements should never be made permanent. But this wasn't part of any archive. None of the youth had heard it before. None of the other elders recognized it. Even Miskwa didn't seem to know where it came from. The first tape opens with silence. Long, still, unbroken. Then, a single breath. And then his voice. This is the tale of the one who waits in the cracks, where sound lingers, where air doesn't flow. Already, something's off. This wasn't the usual cadence of an elder telling a familiar story. There were no pauses for translation, no ceremonial intro. It was as if the story had already started without him. It walks where names go to rot, he says. It speaks in forgotten versions of things you thought you'd never say. Then he laughs, but it's not a full laugh. It's like he caught himself just before a punchline he didn't understand. The story, if it even is one, keeps shifting between imagery. One moment, it's about a shadow between the trees. The next, it's about a word no one remembers teaching their children. He describes a mouth without sound, breathing between syllables. He says, it listens from inside the echo, and if you say the same sentence twice, it hears the one you meant. I played the tape 3 times. Each time, the words were different. Not just phrasing, events, timelines, whole details that hadn't been there before. On the second listen, he mentions a storm, a real one, August 2017, the derecho that ripped through that region. He says, and when the power goes out, it will stand in the hallway light and wonder why you forgot its name. That storm hadn't happened yet when the tape was recorded. It was dated 2015, twice verified. And yet, he described the exact damage to the schoolhouse windows, the exact name of the volunteer fire chief who would go missing like they were being exhaled through. One woman collapsed. Another said the words were folding inside her head. She described it as not a story anymore, more like a room, a place I had to leave, but couldn't find the door. After that session, the tape was shelved, until Miskwa himself asked for it back. He said he had to try again, that the story wasn't done, that he needed to contain it. The final recording is dated 6 months before his death, but something about his voice, it sounds older, cracked in ways that don't come from age, but from distance. like he was somewhere else, while still speaking. He begins, "It doesn't want to be told. It wants to be believed. It waits inside the lungs of the ones who say it out loud, and I've said it too many times." He coughs, not just once, but a full minute of dry, rasping gasps. Then, softer. "It remembered my breath. It knew where to find me. Each time I told the story, it got closer to the part I hadn't lived yet." He pauses, and then, clear, terrified, honest, he says, "It's not a story anymore. It's awake." The tape cuts out. No end, no final note. Just that sentence, repeating once, faintly distorted, as if it was trying to learn how to say itself. The others on the reserve said he stopped talking after that. He didn't die right away, but he refused to speak. Carried a bundle of cedar with him at all times, slept facing the doorway, even in daylight. And then one morning, he was found on the floor of his smokehouse. No signs of injury, but his lungs were empty. Not collapsed, not punctured, just vacant. Like something had taken the last breath and kept it. The story is gone now. The tapes were sealed. Some believe they were buried in the old field where children were taught never to walk. But the note that came with the box I received was signed M, which means someone else copied it, which means the story wanted to be heard again. And maybe that's how it spreads, not through ink, not through paper, but through breath, through the act of telling and listening. If you're still with me, and you're breathing just a little heavier now, ask yourself, is it the fear, or did the story find your lungs too? This is MindFuel, and the stories we're telling aren't always ours to tell. It's listening. It was a forestry crew, working well outside the marked timber zone in northern Mississippi. Choctaw land, dense with undergrowth and broken only by small deer trails. They were rerouting a section of road that locals claimed hadn't been maintained in decades. The logs were stacked, the stumps cleared, the work deliberate, until one of the backhoes struck something buried just beneath the loam. Not stone, not wood, but gourd. The worker who found it said it made no sound when struck. No echo. Just an odd, hollow silence. It was a ceremonial drum, hand-carved from calabash, worn but intact. Deep scratches along the rim, designs along the side, dulled by soil and time, but unmistakably Choctaw. It hadn't been seen in living memory. No record in museums, no mention in tribal archives. But the elders knew what it was. They didn't celebrate the discovery. They didn't examine it. They asked, quietly, that it be taken away, far away, buried again. That night, before the crew could decide what to do with it, the first sound came. One beat. Just after midnight, a low thud. Not loud, but so heavy it seemed to bend the walls around it. They thought it was a prank, a shift in air pressure, someone messing with the sight. But the beat came again, always at the same time. One per night, nothing more. They moved the drum to storage, then to a transport shed. It didn't matter. Wherever it was, the beat followed. Not louder, not faster. Just one deliberate thump each night. Then the animals began avoiding the area. Dogs wouldn't cross the lot where it was stored. Deer vanished from the tree line. Birds stopped singing near it. Even the rats in the storage shed disappeared. The site became unnervingly still at night, except for the drum. Then it stopped. No warning, no final beat, just silence. For 3 days, nothing. And then, the ground itself began to pulse. It wasn't visible, not quite, but those working near the site reported nausea, unease, a sense of movement beneath their boots, as if something was shifting just beneath the crust of the earth. Like breathing, but heavier, more distant. One technician, curious but cautious, placed a contact microphone into the soil. The playback was analyzed by 2 independent sound labs. Neither could identify the source. The file showed low-frequency oscillations, too regular to be seismic, too structured to be geological. There was rhythm, a bass line, far deeper than human hymn, except on one, where a single frame remains intact. A footprint, massive, deep, but not shaped like any known animal. Not hoof, not paw. Something wide, flat, as if the earth had worn its own shoes. And here's where it crosses from story into survival. The local Choctaw don't speak of it, not even to their own. But there's a term, passed quietly between elders, never written down. Translated roughly, it means, the one who keeps rhythm so others don't forget how to march. The drum was a warning. It beat to remind something what walking felt like. And when it stopped, that something stood up. You've just heard Chapter 4 of Volume 5, Native Americans. It's worse than skinwalkers. If you're still here, still listening, remember this. The most ancient things didn't need names. They already knew yours. Subscribe to MindFuel to hear what comes next, because the rhythm hasn't ended. It's just counting slower now. My name is Gerald Chamakee. I was born on Kizakus First Nation land, Saskatchewan. I worked for Parks Canada for almost 2 decades, mostly historical surveys. My job wasn't to chase wildlife or guide tourists. It was to record sacred geography. Places too old to name, but never forgotten by the people who lived beside them. This story, it starts at one of those places. They called it the Old Circle, a traditional medicine wheel, prehistoric, even by the standards of the elders. From above, it looked like any other ceremonial site, a ring of rocks laid into the prairie, spokes radiating from the center. Always the same shape, unchanged for centuries, until the day it wasn't. It was my 3rd visit in late spring. I hiked out before dawn with a Cree tracker named Avery. He didn't say much, didn't have to. We both knew what we were seeing before we even stepped foot inside the radius. Some of the outer stones had shifted. That wasn't unusual. Wind, erosion, maybe even curious hikers. But this wasn't random. The outer ring was starting to bow inward, like the wheel was curling into itself. Avery crouched low and touched the grass. "There's no drag marks," he said. "No animal tracks. Nothing moved them." The stones were heavy, hefted by people generations ago, some over 100 pounds each. Yet here they were, turned and tucked inward, like someone had carefully rearranged them by hand. We took photos, logged coordinates. But the deeper we documented, the more I noticed something else: the shadows. Each stone had a shadow that pointed inward, every one. Not toward the sun, but the circle's center. That wasn't possible. I kept adjusting my angle, repositioning, but Avery just stood still, staring toward the heart of the wheel. "Something's inside it," he finally whispered. "Something watching from below." I dismissed it as paranoia. We were both tired. I chalked it up to superstition or tricks of light. But later that night, I reviewed the drone footage on my laptop. The sun had shifted overhead during filming, but the shadows, they didn't move. Not once. The next morning, Avery went back without me. He said he'd noticed a smell near the stones, like wet fur and iron. He wanted to check for any dead animals that might have wandered close. He didn't come back until nightfall, pale, quiet. I asked him what he found. He just handed me a bag. Inside were bones, small, precise, a dozen or so, cleaned, bleached, arranged in a near-perfect arc. "They weren't there yesterday," he muttered, "and they weren't scattered. Someone, or something, laid them in a pattern, in the shape of a jaw." I didn't sleep that night. 3 days later, I returned alone. I had to see it again. By then, the circle
Dead, still. And I heard it. A single breath. Long, deep. Not from above or around, but from beneath. A sound like the ground had lungs. I didn't tell anyone what I felt that night. I couldn't. I was still trying to convince myself I imagined it. But then the dream started. It was always the same. I'd be standing in the center of the circle, the stones towering high like teeth. Then they'd clamp down. Not from above, but from within me. My ribs breaking, my own body folding in. I'd wake up, clawing at my stomach. Avery said he had the same dreams. 1 week later, he disappeared. His truck was found abandoned near the trailhead. Inside, the radio was still playing. A traditional drumming track on repeat, a drum beat out of rhythm, like a heartbeat with an arrhythmia. Search teams combed the prairie for days. No tracks, no clothing, no signs of struggle. Except one thing. The drone team flew another pass over the wheel. It had changed again. The shape wasn't circular anymore. It was jagged, wider on one end, tapered at the other. From above, it looked like an open mouth. Every stone positioned like a tooth. A maw yawning up at the sky. No more symmetry, no more ceremony. Just hunger. We called in cultural specialists, elders, geologists. None of them had an answer. But the stories began surfacing, quietly, in private, from people who knew the old ways, but didn't dare speak them publicly. One elder said the wheel wasn't built to honor something. It was built to trap something. A shape left in stone. To confuse whatever had tried to rise. A cage made not of bars, but of memory and ritual, meant to lull it into stillness. But something had disturbed the pattern. Time, erosion, maybe even us. And it had started to wake. That was the last time I returned to the site. But the final footage still haunts me. Shot by a student. The drone circled over the wheel just before nightfall. And for a single frame, just one, you can see a shadow crawling out from the center. Long, thin, ribbed like the inside of a throat. Then gone. The university dismissed it as a glitch, but I know what I saw. And I know what it felt like to stand inside that circle, like being chewed.
if you're still watching, if any of this reaches you. When she first moved out to the coast, there was nothing but quiet. The kind of quiet you feel more than hear, not the silence of absence, but of something listening. Her name was June, mid-50s, a recently retired geologist who wanted a final chapter away from city noise and concrete. The home was perched on a rugged cliff edge on the far end of Haida Gwaii, surrounded by mist and cedar. She told friends the property was untouched, a rare find, no neighbors, no town lights, just waves and wind. But she didn't know what the land remembered. The first person to visit was an old woman from Masset village. She didn't smile, just stared at the house, then at June, and said plainly, "You bought the cliff with the shadow." June chuckled, assuming it was some regional folklore. The woman didn't laugh. She leaned in and whispered, "It moves in the salt wind. You'll never see it come. You'll only feel it behind you." That was the only warning. The first few days were uneventful, breezy, quiet, beautiful. She took walks down to the jagged shoreline, took pictures of driftwood and barnacle-encrusted rocks. But her dog, Max, a sturdy golden retriever, stopped coming with her after the third day. He'd freeze at the edge of the porch, refusing to step any closer to the sea. He would whimper, tail tucked between his legs, staring past her shoulder every time she tried to coax him forward. Not at the horizon, at something behind her. She thought it was nerves, new surroundings, until she noticed something herself. Her shadow, at dusk, started acting strangely. One evening, while photographing the shoreline, she noticed her own shadow bending the wrong way. The sun was behind her, but the silhouette extended toward it, curving against the light. She stepped to the left. The shadow didn't follow in sync, it lagged, like something pretending to be her, but unsure how. The wind picked up then. Cold, damp, heavy with salt. It carried a low whisper, not a scream, not a howl, but a voice, her own voice. "Come back," it said, soft, deliberate. "You were with us before." She spun around. No one, nothing but mist crawling over the rocks. "We've missed your skin." Her knees buckled. She stumbled back up to the house, slammed the door, and stayed locked in. Max was already hiding under the bed. That night, she slept with the lights on. But the shadows still moved. At 2:17 a.m., the power cut. All clocks stopped. The room plunged into darkness, and yet her window lit up. Not from the moon, from something just beyond the glass. A shape in the fog. Wide, slender, like stretched skin filled with wind. It didn't knock. It didn't break in. It breathed. And as it did, condensation formed on the inside of the window, letters drawn from the inside out. But as she reversed out of the long gravel driveway, she froze, because the trees were bent, all of them, leaning away from the ocean. Not from the wind, but as if something on the shore was pulling them toward it. Like a breath, inhaling, and where the mist once hovered above the waves, it now crept along the treetops, reaching for her. Locals say she left the island that day, drove onto the ferry, never returned. But a few years later, a storm washed up an object on the rocky beach below her old home. It was a full-length mirror, weather-worn, water-stained. And in the mirror's reflection, there was always a figure standing behind the viewer, no matter where you moved. A human shape, skin glistening as if always wet, never blinking. Locals gave it a name in whispers, the Wind Skinner. And if you hear your own voice carried in the mist, they say, it's already found its way inside you. You were never supposed to make it this far. Not here. Not past the teeth in the circle. Not through the wind that remembered your name. And yet, here you are. Still listening. Still remembering. The stories. They were never just stories. They were blueprints, containers, made to hold things that had no shape, no place, no name, until you gave them one, until you spoke them aloud, again and again. Every retelling, an offering, a doorway creaking open. You opened it. You kept it open. You thought the storyteller was a guide. You thought the voice belonged to someone. But the truth is, it's you now. There's no more narrator. Just memory. Just echo. Narrator not found. Rebuilding memory. New voice, cold, composed. Volume 6 is already written. It's inside you. You've always known it. We are your memory now.